Hi, everyone. We'll get started in about a minute. We'll give a few more people some time to join. Just stay tuned. All right, looks like people are trickling in. So thank you, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Couchbase versus DynamoDB, Better Performance and Flexibility at Lower Cost. Here are a few guidelines before we get started. All attendees are on mute, but you can submit any questions through the Q&A box on the left of your screen. We'll try to address them at the end of the hour. If you're having audio issues, please make sure you're using a Chrome browser and try refreshing the page. The webinar recording will be sent to you in a follow-up email, and you can download the slides at any time in the resource folder. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Perry Krug, our architect in the Office of the CTO at Couchbase. Perry, over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning, everyone. For those of you joining us in the U.S., good evening and even good night to those of you in the rest of the world. My name is Perry Krug, as Tanya said. I'm coming to you today from sunny London. We're having a wonderful summer over here. Thank you again for joining. Over the next 45 minutes or so, want to provide some perspective on where we see Couchbase fitting into an AWS or cloud environment, and with some specific comparisons to DynamoDB. Certainly going to be making some bold claims here. At the end of the day, we're interested in creating a conversation, and for those of you on the line to voice your feedback and have some further follow-up conversations if any of this is resonating with you, and equally, if not, would be interested in understanding for our own technical honesty as much as possible. So with that, let's get going. We'll run through a little bit of some of the challenges that we've been hearing from our customers and users as they explore the database landscape. Focus a little bit on how Couchbase has been able to overcome many of those challenges. Talk through a few specific customer examples, and then end with some next steps and how you might get started. So as we get into this, I'm going to take a walk through four somewhat high-level challenges that we and our customers have expressed in their experience using DynamoDB. For anybody on the line not already familiar, DynamoDB is a key value database provided by Amazon in their AWS Amazon Web Services. It is a database as a service that Amazon provides, and in many ways is used as a comparison to Couchbase. I think over the course of this webinar, and certainly in deeper investigation, you'll see quite a large difference between what those two technologies are offering, and even in many cases understand that there are different use cases that are fit for either one. But if we're looking at them as a like-for-like comparison, these are some of the main challenges that our customers have expressed to us. The first one being really quite high and in many cases unpredictable costs. Using a service, a database as a service, is very attractive, but comes with a real lack of control around your usage and cost management. Amazon really drives you towards signing up for provisioned capacity that you set the limits or the throughput that you want to get out of the system, and you are charged for that. They have a pricing calculator that takes into account many complex metrics, at least 7 different variables, each of which, as you add on, increases the cost that you will pay for the system. So making it easy to get started with, but the cost can increase dramatically from there. And even in a more unpredictable manner, a lot of the management capabilities that Amazon is taking on for you in terms of managing a service actually ends up increasing your cost as well without you having much control over it. So things like auto-scaling, things like repartitioning and adding multiple replicas, as they do those things in response to your workload or changes on their end, you get charged back for it. And there are a number of limits around the amount of data that you can store, the size of the objects, the throughput, both read and write, that you're allowed to apply to your workload, all of which come at a cost. The second challenge is the idea that you are being locked into an AWS ecosystem. And for many customers, that's perfectly acceptable. Making the decision that AWS is their cloud provider of choice is not anything that I'm arguing against. The challenge is by handing your data over to AWS for them to control takes away your ability to manage that data, takes away your ability to migrate it to any other platform if you need to, both another cloud or even back on-premise. Once you are using in DynamoDB, you are subject to Amazon's cost model. There have been a number of high-profile situations where, unbeknownst to the user, they have been charged astronomical amounts of money because of the usage that they're putting on the system without any guidance from AWS. Certainly, it's in Amazon's best interest to get you to use as much as possible and charge you for it afterwards. But this isn't particularly beneficial to you as the end user. You also have to pay for all of your development and early testing efforts. It's very hard to model your application and model your data without accessing and test your application without accessing Dynamo directly, which means you're paying for that usage as well, which may not be delivering revenue that a production system would. Number 3, we have heard and certainly been able to demonstrate quite limited performance at scale from DynamoDB. It handles relatively low workloads with relatively low data volumes very well. But as you start to reach into the higher levels of either read or write throughput, there are a number of gates, a number of hurdles that you have to walk through and jump over. Some of these are resolved by increasing the limits that Amazon specifies for you. So if you need more than 1,000 operations per second, more than 1,000 writes, you can ask them for more, and of course they'll charge you more. But if you try to go above your limit, you're going to be throttled or blocked. There are internal and back-end repartitioning and resharding practices that Amazon takes on your behalf to provide better performance, but that can increase your cost, can create sprawl of your data set across regions, which has different impacts on performance. Having to choose shard keys based upon your data can easily lead to hotspots. Hotspots and lead to performance challenges and circle back to you needing to either re-architect or take steps I was speaking to a customer the other day saying that their experience with Dynamo consisted of regularly having to wipe the Dynamo database and reload it just to undo the auto sharding and auto partitioning that had happened in the background and ended up causing more problems than it was meant to solve. There are other examples like Amazon's introduction of the Dynamo Accelerator, the DAX layer, which just adds a caching layer on top of DynamoDB. Can provide better read throughput, doesn't help you on writes at all, and adds another layer of inconsistency and management for you as the end user. And then lastly, kind of bringing this all together, Dynamo may seem simple at first, and in fact it is. You can get up and running very quickly if you are an Amazon customer. You can put some data in, you can get some data out. That certainly makes it very attractive to get started with. But as soon as you want to do anything a little more sophisticated, either at higher levels of performance or more flexible access to your data, you need to start adding services. You need to start integrating with the other options that Amazon provides. Now, on one hand, it's great that Amazon provides many different database and data processing layers, but that dramatically increases the complexity that you as an end user need to grapple with in order to get the functionality that your application requires. And this is again directly from a customer of ours who initially was evaluating DynamoDB, trying to get the AWS support and service teams to provide best practices, to provide integration help is very, very challenging. As with any large company providing tens or even hundreds of different products, you're not going to find any individual that is able to talk intelligently about a wide range of those products, to be able to provide a single set of integrated best practices. And so it's left up to either you or you as a developer, you as your operations team, or you as a company to hire an outside consultant team to manage the integration, data movement, data migration, different developer APIs between Dynamo, but then the RDS, Redshift, Lambda, and all of the other data management layers that Amazon provides, and up to you to manage the version differences, the integration, the data model changes, which puts an increased operational and development cost and friction on top of you, and of course you're paying per usage for all of those services. So it's simple to get started. There's an attractiveness to the extreme amount of flexibility that you have in the entire Amazon ecosystem, but at the same time that adds a lot of complexity for any sort of sophisticated application. With a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, if you're looking at your application, your organization, and you really only need basic key value access, you don't really need performance at scale, you're happy to be beholden to the pricing and usage and availability patterns that AWS provides, and you really don't care about cost, then Dynamo is maybe a good choice for you. But if you're starting to ask yourself, is this really the right solution for me long term, you may be looking for a different option. And of course, I'm here as a representative of Couchbase. I'm going to tell you how and why Couchbase is being chosen to overcome some of these challenges, but equally there are many other database technologies out there that can provide different capabilities to DynamoDB. So let's take a look at how we would discuss and think about both saving money supporting growth and giving you capability with Couchbase. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you might begin to get access to it. If we take cost right away from the perspective, unlike Dynamo's pay per use, pay per operation, pay per data amount, pay for oversizing, pay for hidden costs, Couchbase tries to be as simple and transparent as possible. You use Couchbase through a license model. One license provides you with both technical support and the license to run the software in production. You don't need a license for any development nodes, whether those be on your laptop, on your on-premise system, or even running in the cloud somewhere. We provide kind of simple per node license models. If you're looking to use and roll out a large amount of Couchbase, there are volume-based and site license options. And then with the recent introduction of Kubernetes and containers, we're seeing a explosion of usage over there. And so we have targeted and specific kind of licensing discussions to enable and make sure not to be prohibitively expensive when running in containers. Once you start to compare any sort of reasonable scale into the thousands of operations per second, the gigabytes, hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes of data storage, Couchbase has a much lower TCO than storing and accessing that same data in DynamoDB. Another really strong, slightly more technical perspective, with Couchbase, you're not locked into any cloud provider. In fact, you're not locked into anything. Couchbase is open source technology, and so you're free to use us completely for free. You're free to, you're welcome to use our Enterprise Edition, which comes with the license and support. But Couchbase, as a technology, is designed to run on any sort of infrastructure, whether that be your bare metal systems in your data center, a virtualized environment in VMware, for instance. We have very strong support and production workloads in Docker, Kubernetes, and OpenShift. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Running on all the major public clouds, so Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, both in a kind of compute IaaS layer, and also being able to run inside of each of their managed Kubernetes services, EKS, GKS, and EKS, and replicating across all of those. Any sort of reasonable enterprise today is going to have multiple deployment infrastructures. You may have started with your own on-premise data center management. You may be in the process of moving to a cloud, but that means for some amount of time you have to manage applications and data in both. Looking further into the future, you may be thinking, how do I potentially get the same data to be replicated across multiple clouds? Or do I simply want the portability to choose when I want to leverage Amazon versus Azure? And Couchbase gives you all of that flexibility at a data layer, the ability to replicate real time, the ability to replicate in a master, active deployment is something that's very appealing to prevent yourself from being locked into not only the cost structure or the infrastructure of a cloud provider, but also the development APIs. Running an application, developing against DynamoDB, moving that data over to, say, Cosmos, you're going to have to rewrite your application. You're going to have to change the way that you model your data, change the way the APIs that you use to access it. Whereas if you have Couchbase deployed in both locations, the access pattern, the APIs, the SDKs, and the data model is exactly the same. And then finally, Couchbase, in our world, we don't look at just a centralized data center or cloud-based deployment, but being able to take some or all of that same data and replicate it out bidirectionally to edge or mobile devices. So there are many customers that are using Couchbase to replicate their data to a mobile application, either a phone or a tablet, and equally to gather data from the edge from any embedded system, be it a Windows, Android, or Java-based system, and a single integrated data model with the same APIs and access patterns out at the edge, as well as in a centralized capacity, gives you great flexibility to choose the infrastructure and the location that you want to use Couchbase. One note as we talk about specifically Kubernetes, and Kubernetes, all of the variants of that. So Kubernetes kind of at the core, OpenShift, EKS, AKS, GKS, even PKS from Pivotal. All of these are offshoots and variants, supersets and subsets of the Kubernetes project, and Couchbase has a product called the Couchbase Autonomous Operator that allows us to integrate with any of these Kubernetes layers and provide the full lifecycle management of a Couchbase or more than one Couchbase cluster inside of Kubernetes. Everything from deployment to scaling out, scaling back in, automatic and automated upgrades, backup, monitoring, all of this is included. So this is all under the umbrella of infrastructure as code and really leveraging the power of Kubernetes and its operator concept to provide CI/CD and autonomous operation. So on that note, if you're interested in learning more, there are plenty of resources available. There are other webinars that we have delivered, and we're happy to discuss how you might start using Couchbase in a containerized, but even more so container orchestration environment like Kubernetes or one of its offshoots. And then the last kind of piece of where we see Couchbase having a strong advantage is just in the power that the system can provide. And on one hand, this certainly comes down to performance and scale, being able to get very, very high throughputs, being able to get very, very low latencies, being able to store hundreds of gigabytes, terabytes of data in a system. But power is not just about performance and scale. Power is what can you do with the data when it is in that system. And Couchbase for many years now has talked about a data platform that provides a variety of different services, a variety of different access patterns, everything from key value access, JSON native document storage, SQL querying with our query language that looks very much and acts very much like SQL, a secondary indexing layer underneath that, full text searching and an inverted index underneath that, real-time analytics, an event processing engine, and as I mentioned, mobile synchronization. Now, you may be thinking, how can one platform provide all of these capabilities? And this really comes down to the core architecture that Couchbase has developed over many years of using a core data storage and replication engine and layering on these different services and access patterns so that at runtime for different applications, different use cases, you can choose to turn on or turn off different capabilities. This also allows and creates workload isolation. That means the SQL query engine or the full text engine or the analytics engine is and can be separated at an infrastructure layer from the other parts of the system, which allows, even in a cluster where you are using all of the capability, allows you to isolate that workload and ensure that one pattern, one access method, one indexing layer does not impact the performance capability or availability of your other layers, and also be able to scale out or scale back in or scale up each of those services independently. So, for instance, our query engine tends to leverage CPU more heavily than other parts of the system, and so as you need to do and perform more and more queries, you can add more nodes just to the query engine, which automatically and linearly scales out without having to reshuffle any of the data, without having to change the index partitioning, without having to impact or scale or rebalance any of the other pieces. And this sort of flexibility allows for very, very dynamic tuning, both of hardware and topology, to whatever your use case requires. And it also doesn't create undue complexity because you are able to run all of these services on a smaller set and a shared set of resources and hardware if the use case and workload fits. And so this sort of flexibility allows for infrastructure changes if you want to change the instances or the hardware underneath. If you need to scale out on demand one application versus another, or if you're using Couchbase for different applications, you can deploy it with different services turned on or turned off without changing your API, without changing your programming model, without changing your administration of it. Everything is still a single cluster and managed from a single pane of glass or REST API. And so what we find is, because of these different capabilities, our customers and our users come to Couchbase from a variety of different angles. Some users want to use Couchbase, some organizations want to use Couchbase as a caching layer on top of a legacy database system, primarily using our key value memory first architecture allows them to provide Memcached-like levels of performance on top of their existing system. Other customers decide I need to pull data from different locations, maybe internal systems or even external APIs. I want to pull it all together and aggregate that data into a source of truth that I can provide a single querying or an integrated access on top of. And so Couchbase allows you to do that. And equally, there are customers that choose to build part or their entire application using Couchbase as their system of record. The persistence, the replication, the backup capabilities allow Couchbase to act as a system of record. And I often talk about this spectrum of cache, source of truth, and system of record. What makes Couchbase a good caching layer, its performance, its scalability, makes it a very good database. The things that make it a good database, the persistence, the reliability, the variety of access patterns, only serves to enhance its functionality as a caching layer. And so we see customers migrating up and down this spectrum. We see customers choosing Couchbase for different capabilities. And one of the things that's not right here on the slide, but is another important driver, especially as we talk about cloud, is Couchbase's cross-data center replication. It's multi-master, active-active replication between two or more sites, two or more data centers, two or more regions, two or more clouds, and in many cases, customers come and say, I have an existing workload that I need to be replicated globally. And so they choose Couchbase to do that replication and then find that it's able to meet a variety of other needs through the different services. So hopefully that was not too fast of an overview of how and why Couchbase can provide advantages over DynamoDB or other databases in the context of cost, cloud lock-in, or functionality and integration of capability. So as we move on to the next section, talk a little bit about some of the customer examples that are using Couchbase today. We have deployments and hundreds of customers deployed across Google and Azure, as well as a heavy footprint in AWS, and many customers running in their own data center, either on-premise or virtualized. I'm just going to choose three case studies today, all focused on running Couchbase inside of AWS, given that this discussion is about DynamoDB. The first one, certainly familiar to those of you in the U.S., Intuit, the makers of Tax and TurboTax and related products. Couchbase serving a wide microservices layer on AWS, servicing over 250,000 concurrent users. An interesting sort of paradigm with TurboTax usage. It tends to be very spiky. It tends to be heavily used in the January, February, March, April time frames, and maybe not as heavily used in the rest of the year outside of the U.S. tax system. And so putting their data in a system that requires you to pay for your peak usage, that requires you to pay for data storage, whether you're using it or not, is not particularly attractive to that sort of workload. And so Intuit relies on Couchbase to be able to handle those spikes in workload, but also scale back down or even turn off in certain microservices where they're not being heavily leveraged or turned on at all in the non-tax season. As well as providing an increased performance and throughput by being able to replicate Couchbase globally, by being able to scale and maintain it with 100% 24/7 uptime. Another customer, actually quite near and dear to my heart. I've been working with Viber for many years now. Viber has gone through a number of different database technologies before landing on Couchbase about 6 years ago, and they're regularly telling us that Couchbase is the only database that they've found that can provide the levels of performance and scalability that they need to run their operational workload. For those of you not familiar with Viber, they are a chat messaging system similar to WhatsApp or Skype, much more popular in the Europe and Asia regions rather than the United States, but a very large estate in Amazon, storing multiple terabytes of data in Couchbase, handling multiple billions of events and transactions per day, bursting up to 300,000 or even up into the millions of operations per second. Really, their initial adoption of Couchbase was to replace a Redis on top of Mongo estate. They had hundreds of nodes of Redis and hundreds of nodes of MongoDB, and were really hampered by the operational friction between managing consistency between a caching layer and a separate persistence layer. They were able to collapse those two down to half of the number of servers with Couchbase. This was many years ago, and they've continued to grow with that. They use Couchbase as their system of record for their chat messaging and kind of related applications, everything from gaming to payment services on top of their messaging layer. An interesting anecdote about Viber: they tend to be one of our higher performance, higher throughput customers, regularly pushing Couchbase clusters up into the 1 million or 2 million operations per second. They have told us that in their testing, they were able to push Couchbase. They try to test for 2 or 3 times their peak production workload, and Couchbase handles that. What they didn't realize was that through combinations of the occasional bug in their code and a very spiky workload from their users because of certain worldwide events, they would turn around and see their Couchbase production systems running at more than 6 or 7 times their normal peak usage, so bursting up to 7 million operations per second. And looking back, they are very happy to have Couchbase able to scale up and down with that workload without throttling, without blocking their throughput, whereas certainly any usage of DynamoDB would have throttled back that usage, or would have cost them astronomical amounts more to support that workload. With Couchbase, they didn't even know that it was happening until after the fact. And then lastly, a customer of ours, a large healthcare health company in the U.S., Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, using Couchbase to deliver a platform for health applications. They call it their Newton platform. A generic sort of application where they can deploy different drug-specific applications, either for their pharmacies and their lab staff, their B2B business. Couchbase able to give them both the performance, the data storage, and the flexibility that they required. Dynamo as a key value store was not flexible enough for them, and so they started to see that they would need to migrate and manage that data in other systems within Amazon, whether that be the new document DB, whether that be RDS, whether that be Redshift, or any of the other ones. And the operational and development overhead of keeping data stored and copied and ETL'd in a variety of different layers was not particularly attractive to them. Couchbase providing both a key value, a SQL, and a full text querying interface, all in one integrated system that is tested and deployed and upgraded together, allowed them to focus on their data and the applications they were building on top of that, rather than the operational management of data flows and different data storage systems. And as a relatively new customer of Couchbase's, Pfizer find it very easy to deploy and manage Couchbase within the AWS cloud. So just to start to wrap up a little bit and leave some time for the many questions that are coming in, looking at why Couchbase in general, and certainly some of the specific differences to DynamoDB. The integrated platform means that you, as an end user or a developer, don't have to worry about different programming APIs. You don't have to worry about different data models and ETL and schema changes between one or the other. You also don't have to worry about upgrading one system and having it break another one that was previously working. With Couchbase, all of the services are tested together and are provided to you in a single cluster view, a single management layer that can be scaled and deployed in a variety of flexible topologies, depending on the needs that you might have. Certainly, if you are looking at a multi-cloud or a hybrid cloud or even a cloud-agnostic strategy, choosing a single cloud provider to put your data in is not going to fit into that model. I would say you don't have to be you don't have to be dealing with the initial complexity of managing workloads across clouds, but simply the ability to be cloud portable and cloud agnostic means you're going to have to put your data into a layer that can be ported, replicated, and copied across those clouds, or your on-premise system, and Couchbase provides that. And then when it comes down to the performance, the volume, the data modeling restrictions, and the complexity and unpredictable nature of cost, Dynamo can turn out to be quite expensive and scary to predict your cost of, whereas Couchbase is much more transparent and simple, and also does not require you to pay for each individual operation or each individual gigabyte that you store. A single Couchbase system can provide hundreds of operations per second, all the way up to millions of operations per second, without paying any more money in licensing. Okay, right on time, coming up to 20 minutes on the hour. I will start to look at the questions that are streaming in. Thank you very much for sending them. As a quick getting started note, we talked a lot about Couchbase on AWS, but we have equal integrations with the other three cloud providers. Those links and certainly these slides will be sent to you afterwards, give you a place to start getting up and running wherever your cloud of choice is, either directly on their infrastructure as a service, so running Couchbase as an instance, as a VM inside of that, or if you want to leverage their Kubernetes as a service or any of the other Kubernetes layers, you can go to couchbase.com/Kubernetes and find out how to very, very quickly get started without any setup or management of your part once you have Kubernetes or one of the variants there. As we wrap up, and I'm going to come to questions in a minute, thank you very much for spending the time with me today in your morning or your evening or night, wherever you are around the world. We are certainly, taking a bold stance and talking about the competitive discussion. I'm happy to and very eager to have a very specific conversation, whatever your feedback may be on this, whether you agree with or disagree with. So feel free to reach out to myself, Perry at Couchbase.com, my Twitter handle, at Perry Krug, or any of the other Couchbase contact points that you have with us. So with that and a little bit of time remaining, allow me to start reading out these questions. As I go through this, I'll read them out and answer them here on the line. If I don't get to your question, I apologize in advance. We will follow up afterwards. And for those of you on the line, please don't hesitate to send any more in. So a couple of comments. Good point that auto management of the database can force re-architecture of the data models. This is something we talked about at the beginning, but the fact that Amazon automatically repartitions, automatically shards, automatically replicates your data behind the scenes for certain workloads and data models, that works very well. For many, it does not, and so it leads you into hotspots. It leads you into over replicating or over sharding, which leads to higher and higher costs. And with Couchbase, we remove a lot of that restriction on you to choose a shard key. We also allow you to manage the distribution and topology, whether within a single cluster or across multiple clusters at your own to fit your own needs. Other questions: do you offer Couchbase as a managed service in public cloud? What is the cost model for on-prem customers who have no SQL requirements within their own DC? Good question. Thank you. So we do offer Couchbase as a managed service. Today, that is more about offloading the operational management of Couchbase. So we have a team that will handle all of the setup and scaling and deployment, backups and upgrades for you, but it's much more of a managed service rather than a hosted or as a service model. It's still you running Couchbase and a team being there to take away some of the or all of the operational overhead. We're also very much in the process right now of developing a full database or Couchbase as a service. This will be a separate kind of product interface that will take away all of the management and provide you with a, dare I say, Dynamo-like experience that, again, we will manage for you, but do much more of that automated as a service workload. There is lots more to talk about that, and so I'm happy to follow up later. And I would say look look for some more specific announcements towards the end of the year or into next year as that gets rolled out. We often get asked about Couchbase as a service and managed services, and certainly it's something that we want to provide as another layer, another way of getting access to Couchbase. But I would also say that even today, the way that Couchbase has been designed and the way that it's deployed makes for very, very low operational friction. We have many of our very large customers that regularly tell us they have only 1 or 2 full-time engineers, part of their SRE team, managing multiple Couchbase clusters. There's a couple good blog posts out there about LinkedIn talking about a small virtual team who have other day jobs managing their Couchbase estate. And this comes in large parts from the way that Couchbase manages itself internally, the way that it scales kind of linearly and transparently, the auto-healing capabilities that we have built in, the lack of any sort of regular manual maintenance that has to go on. And so, without a doubt, there are benefits to having Couchbase as a service running, but at the same time, if you're not already familiar with managing and administering a Couchbase system, I would say it's worth understanding how simple it can be. Your question was also, what is the cost model for on-premise for customers in their own data center? We try to be as simple and consistent across all of the deployments that we have. So whether you're using Couchbase on physical hardware, whether you're using Couchbase on VMs, whether you're using Couchbase inside of cloud instances, or even whether you're using Couchbase inside of containers, we tend to look at it at a per node subscription model. And so there is a license cost per node that is based upon the capacity of that node and the support level that you want from the license, and then that one cost per node covers everything, covers the license, covers the support, covers the use of our SDKs and connectors, covers upgrades across different versions. And so if you're on-premise and you're using larger capacity systems, you may pay a different node price than you would be if you're using smaller capacity containers. But the balance of like-for-like capacity tends to even out. So I hope that answered your question. If not, please do follow up afterwards. Does Couchbase care about underlying storage? Do you support CSI in containers for persistent storage? I'm gonna have to admit that I don't know off the top of my head what CSI is. I can probably look it up right now. But we do have support for a couple different persistence layers within Kubernetes, within containers. Couchbase does persist data to disk, and so if you are writing very heavily into the system, you do need a disk layer that can take that. Different to other systems, Couchbase partitions and transparently shards the write traffic across all of the nodes of the system, so you don't need a central data storage layer that all of the Couchbase nodes feed into. And then on the other hand, Couchbase also has a fully in-memory mode, and you can run these two side by side. But if, especially in certain container environments, if you just need a distributed caching layer, using Couchbase in memory can be an attractive option. So on one hand, yes, we do care about our underlying storage. We prefer it to be or we recommend it to be fast enough for your workload. If you're doing a few hundred writes per second or a few thousand writes per day, you can get away with spinning disks and low performance disk layers. If you're doing thousands of writes per second, even some of our customers doing millions of writes per second, you tend to need SSDs, or you tend to want to use Couchbase in memory, where we're not writing that data back to a persistence layer. So it really becomes use case specific. Since Red Hat is moving away from Docker containers and towards Podman, Buildah, and Scopio, Do you support these container technologies in OpenShift? Wow, you are challenging my extensive knowledge of things today. I'm going to have to look up all of those three things, thinking that I knew everything about everything. I can't say today that we support those in OpenShift. I will look up and find out about that. However, we have a very, very strong partnership with Red Hat. Couchbase was one of the first NoSQL databases to provide a production certified integration with OpenShift, and I would expect that to continue as our relationship and those technologies evolve. So I can't say for certain that we support them today, but I would be surprised if OpenShift was moving towards something that we were not also moving towards. Other questions coming in, talking about multi-tenancy. There were a couple questions that came in about namespacing and multi-tenancy. Couchbase today and into the future has kind of a spectrum of multi-tenancy depending on what your requirements are. Some environments want to have as much sharing of the resource of the underlying resources as possible and want to have as many tenants on a single system. Other environments prefer to have logical and security separation between the data. Other systems prefer to have even physical isolation, and so Couchbase allows you to have a spectrum of that. At the most extreme end, obviously having multiple clusters for different tenants is something that many of our customers do. That doesn't scale when you have, or doesn't fit when you have hundreds or thousands of tenants. But if you do need to provide different scalability, physical isolation, that is one option. Within a cluster, we then provide a bucket concept, and a bucket for Couchbase is it's synonymous to a database, and so you may have multiple buckets sitting side by side with each other. They're all sharing the same underlying hardware and resources, but each bucket has its own caching, its own replication, its own statistics and monitoring, its own security segregation, and so that's the next layer of isolation. And then today, we have many customers that are storing multiple tenants within a bucket. Like a database, you would store multiple tables, multiple schemas within a single database. You would do the same thing within a Couchbase bucket. And today, the multi-tenancy approach is to partition namespaces based upon either the key prefix or some other value of the data. And for many use cases, that works well. What we are lacking right now in the current version, and we are addressing with the next version, is the ability to have logical separation within a bucket. So sharing the same hardware, sharing the same caching and replication and configuration capabilities, but providing logical and security isolation between various data sets in a more table or group of table schema perspective. This is something that Couchbase does not do today, and it's something that we are starting to roll out with our next release. It will be in an early preview with our next major release, and then looking to bring that towards production and general availability in the release following. So these are called collections and scopes, and there's the ability then to isolate the data and the security within a bucket level. There's a lot more discussion to be had around that. We're actually planning a beta release of our next version in the coming weeks. Excuse me, and along with that will come some blogs and documentation about the new capabilities. So I would suggest, I'm going to try not to steal everyone's thunder today if I haven't already, and I would suggest keeping an eye out for that in the coming weeks. Okay, starting to finish up on time. Please feel free to send in send in more questions. A question, can't you run DynamoDB locally and save development costs? Certainly this is possible and a more recent capability from Amazon, but it's still not the same as running in a full Dynamo system with the full API and partitioning and sharding and replication aspects. And so to get that sort of test of a near production system, you're going to have to run within Amazon infrastructure and pay for the usage of that system. With Couchbase, you don't. With Couchbase, you can get exactly the same API, exactly the same kind of performance and availability characteristics on either your laptop or a off-cloud system. But even if you are running Couchbase inside of Amazon, you don't necessarily have to pay for our licensing just to use and get access to the system in the exact way that it would perform when you're in production. So maybe there's a middle ground to that discussion. A quick logistics point, question of can we have this video recording? Yes, this webinar has been recorded. It will be sent to you in the coming days after we close out, along with the slides that I showed and some other resources, a white paper and all of the necessary links to get access to Couchbase. Okay, I know I haven't had a chance to answer all of your questions. I tried to pick the ones that multiple people asked about. Closing up on the time here, I will give you maybe 4 minutes of your day back. And again, greatly appreciate you all sticking with me, listening here. I hope this content was useful and informative. Please let us know if it was. Please let us know if it wasn't. Thank you very much, and back to you, Tanya.
Great, thanks, Perry. Yeah, and as Perry mentioned, you can also download the slides in the green folder icon below. You'll also find the white paper in there, and we'll send a follow-up as well with all of those. Please also take a few minutes to answer the survey that will pop up on your screen so we can continue to make these webinars better for you. Thanks again, and have a great day.